Pulen, and I want to share some groundbreaking new research that reshapes everything we know about rice in Chamorro history. In June of 2025, archaeologist Mike Carson and his colleagues published a study titled Earliest Evidence of Rice Cultivation in Remote Oceania, ritual use by the first islanders in the Marianas 3,500 years ago. What they found is stunning. They confirmed that rice was present in the Marianas during the earliest settlement period, around 1500 to 1100 BCE, more than 3,000 years ago. Even more, they found continuous evidence of rice use all the way into the Lati period, meaning Chamorros had an unbroken tradition of rice since initial settlements. This is shocking because up until now, the conventional interpretation among scholars was that rice entered the Marianas much later, specifically during the Lati period, beginning around 1000 CE. That's more than 2,000 years after the first Chamorros arrived on the islands. The old view was that rice was thought to have been introduced with a secondary population movement from island Southeast Asia that coincided with major cultural changes, including the construction of lattice-stone architecture, demographic growth, the introduction of a unique genetic marker, and the arrival of rats. In this view, rice was a relatively late innovation in Chamorro history, associated with a migration, technological and population shifts rather than with the earliest Chamorro ancestors. Now, the existence of rice in the Marianas, whether it came early with the first settlers or later during the Lati period, is remarkable in itself because while rice cultivation is well attested in the ancestral Austronesian homelands of Taiwan and island Southeast Asia, rice is conspicuously absent throughout Oceania prior to European contact. This absence makes the Marianas exceptional, as they represent the only islands in Oceania with indigenous rice cultivation prior to European contact. Before we get into Carson and colleagues' 2025 study, it's important to understand the earlier evidence and prevailing interpretations about rice in the Marianas, which largely pointed to its appearance during the Lati period. Scholars have relied on multiple lines of evidence, including archaeology, paleobotany, European documentation, and linguistics. The scarce archaeological and paleobotanical evidence included rice husk and spikelet impressions on Lati-era pottery, phytoliths and rice leaves adhering to Lati-era pounders and pottery, and charred grains of rice. European records, such as Fray Juan Pobre's 1602 account, repeatedly reference that Chamorros had rice. Yet, these same records suggest that rice was not a dietary staple, but rather a food cultivated in limited quantities for ritual or ceremonial use. This doesn't mean that Chamorros did not eat rice, but it wasn't a regular dietary staple like breadfruit or taro. Archaeological absence of ancient rice fields or irrigation systems and rice-specific tools support this interpretation. Linguistic evidence also shows that Chamorros had rice long before European contact. The Chamorro language contains numerous Austronesian rice-related words like pugas for uncooked rice and fa'i for rice growing in the field. If rice had only been introduced later by Europeans, Chamorros would have borrowed foreign words for it, just like how the word for apple in Chamorro, manzana, comes from the Spanish manzana. Because of the lack of archaeological, paleobotanical, and documented evidence of rice before the Lati period, scholars speculated that rice was introduced by a secondary population movement no earlier than 1000 CE. But one piece of the puzzle never quite fit: the Chamorro language, the linguistic evidence. As mentioned, Chamorro retained a rich set of rice vocabulary, and at least some of these terms, namely pugas, fa'i, and lusung, are confirmed to be directly inherited from Proto-Austronesian, the ancestral language of all Austronesian languages, including the Chamorro language. The way these words developed in Chamorro, with no borrowed sounds or foreign influence, confirms that they developed naturally, not adopted later. And here's the problem that this poses. If rice had only arrived during the Lati period, thousands of years after the Marianas were first settled, then why did the Chamorro language retain these ancient rice-related words? They should have disappeared from the language if rice was truly absent from the islands for thousands of years. The logical answer is that rice was here from the very beginning, brought by the first Chamorros as part of their ancestral Oceanesian rice cultivation heritage. For a long time, this speculation rested only on linguistic evidence, with no physical evidence. Until now. That's where the 2025 study by Carson and colleagues comes in. Using a multi-method approach including phytolith analysis, microcomputed tomography scanning, and thin-section petrography, they uncovered abundant evidence of rice, such as rice husk and leaf phytoliths, dating to the early settlement period, around 1500 to 1100 BCE. But that's not all, folks. Rice was found not just in the early settlement period, but throughout the entire 3,500-year continuous inhabitation of the site at Retidian First Cave in Guam. This indicates that Chamorros not only brought rice to the Marianas from the very beginning 3,500 years ago, but also continued to use rice all the way up to the Lati period. The location of these rice remains at Retidian First Cave is particularly significant because the rice husk and leaf phytoliths were found almost exclusively on pottery surfaces and not in the surrounding sediments, strongly suggesting deliberate cultural use directly with pottery. The cave's damp conditions make it unlikely that the unprocessed rice was stored in the pottery for food storage. And because only husks and leaf phytoliths were found, rather than other parts which would be expected from cooking rice, it suggests that rice wasn't cooked at the caves. Instead, it points to ritual use. The broader archaeological context of Retidian First Cave supports this interpretation. The cave site is characterized by unique material culture, shell ornaments, finely decorated pottery, pendants, items rare or absent elsewhere. They also contained unusual food remains like relatively large amounts of turtle and bird bones. The cave also featured a freshwater pool prior to sea level change and ancient pictographs. Taken together, these features point to a ritual or ceremonial function for the cave, with rice forming part of this ritual assemblage. The ritual use of rice in the Marianas aligns with broader rice ritualistic traditions. Across East, South, and Southeast Asia, rice has been incorporated into spiritual and ceremonial practices for millennia. Whether as freshly harvested stalks, unprocessed grains, or cooked offerings, the Chamorro ritual use of rice thus may reflect a continuity with ancestral Oceanesian practices. It is worth emphasizing that Retidian First Cave is unique. Continuous rice evidence has not been found elsewhere in the Marianas. At Unai Baput in Saipan, only a small number of rice phytoliths were identified on a stone flake. Other early settlement sites so far yield no rice remains. Retidian First Cave alone preserves a record of rice spanning from the earliest settlements through the Lati period. The implications of this research are as follows. Oceanesian connection. The presence of rice in the Marianas links Chamorro society directly with rice-growing Oceanesian cultures in Taiwan, Luzon, and Sulawesi, where rice cultivation is attested by 2800, 2000, and 1500 BCE respectively. Intentional introduction. Rice was not a late arrival, but was brought deliberately by the earliest settlers to the Marianas from island Southeast Asia around 1500 BCE, confirming what linguistic evidence had suggested. And finally, ritual function. In line with previous research, rice was likely cultivated in small quantities for ceremonial and spiritual use, not as a dietary staple. The evidence situates the Marianas firmly within the broader Oceanesian expansion while also highlighting their uniqueness in Oceania. In conclusion, the 2025 study by Carson and colleagues provides the earliest archaeological confirmation of rice in remote Oceania, dating to the initial settlement period of the Marianas around 1500 BCE. It demonstrates continuity of rice use into the Latte period and establishes rice as an enduring, though primarily ritual component of Chamorro cultural practice. Rice in the Marianas was not a colonial introduction. It was part of Chamorro life from the beginning, a marker of Austronesian heritage from island Southeast Asia, and a practice that sets the Marianas apart from other islands in Oceania. Sejus Masi for watching. Guahusi Pulen. Esta. If you liked and enjoyed the video, consider supporting me on Patreon so I can continue to produce more Pacific Studies content. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on all notifications, follow me on social media at Pulen Speaks, and a special Sejus Masi to Patreon supporters Puti'on, Dylan Sablan, Jesse Babauta, Athena-nike, Reyna Taitingfong, Aguero Carter, Kylon Eckert, Debina Cruz, and Zachary Olivadese. Sejus Masi for watching. Wahusi Pulen, and Pulen has spoken. Esta.